Hey everyone, welcome to lesson 6. So, last time we looked at divine command theory, natural law theory, as well as Kantian ethics, and all of these are deontological theories, but they all offer some pretty different ways on what is moral and how we ought to find that out. So, even if we can settle that question, right, which is unlikely given all the theories that I'm giving you, and I've said before that these theories are often great tools to finding what is ethical rather than by themselves providing ethical truth. But even if we could, right, there's still a question lurking underneath that we as ethicists and people who want to be ethical um, need to address, right? And that question is, why should I care about morality at all, right? What reason do I actually have to be moral if I don't want to be, right? So that's the grounding problem in ethics, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So not just what morality is, but why should I bother with it at all? Okay, so it's kind of a complicated and intimidating sounding concept, the grounding problem, but really it boils down to a pretty simple question, maybe even a childish question, right? Which is why be good, right? Why bother being moral? Okay, so perhaps this does sound like a childish question, but maybe that's not a bad thing, right? Children are remarkably ethically insightful, right? Their ethical intuitions are actually very interesting. When I was subjecting my poor high school classes to a brief unit on ethics, I really found their responses to be quite creative, articulate, and they asked questions that I had never heard when teaching these concepts in college level classes. So maybe let's think about this question a little bit initially, like children, right? So and to further motivate this, right? Why should we be moral? Why should I care about being moral? Well, there seems like there's initially lots of reasons not to be, right? It's hard work trying to figure out what is moral, and it's kind of exhausting sometimes, right? Constantly thinking about how ought I conduct myself in this situation and then in this situation. So there's a lot going on there, right? Then beyond that concern, then it's again hard work to figure out what it is, applying different ethical theories, thinking about what's the right way to think about this, having conflicting intuitions some of the time. So that's kind of tough. Uh, and I've said before, right, that ethics never fails to apply, and that's a big ask, right? It's not like your other classes in college where when does it apply? At high level academic discussions, right, or at applied things at your job. These are pretty specific situations, but ethics, has a much broader scope. So why bother with it all, right? Why not just do whatever? Um, well, one response some people have is to say, it's all subjective, man, right? Or it's all relative to your culture or upbringing. And this is a question that I do want to get to eventually, right? This is the difference between moral objectivism and moral relativism. But even this doesn't solve the grounding problem, right? It just shifts it. And I'll just say something briefly on that, right? If morality is just what my culture says to do, or whatever is subjective, then still, why bother following it? Right? Why not just act differently? What if your culture is wrong or contradicts itself, or you belong to multiple cultures, right? So, even relativists, right, those who think that morality is relative to what I think and what you think, or relative between cultures, still have to face the question, right? Why be good according to one standard when I could just do whatever I want, right? So, like I said, children are quite insightful on this matter, so maybe let's think about it. How might we answer a child who asks us this question, right? Whether that be our own children or our inner child, right? Why bother being good? Well, one reason, one response that we might have for the child is because I said so, right? Um, Nothing quite irritates me quite like when someone says this, because when they're saying this, they're really saying one of two things, right? They're either saying because I don't want to justify myself, leave me alone, or they're saying because I'll punish you if you don't, right? And either one of these, has some some different responses to it. Um, I hope you can't hear the cat playing in the background. Some squeaking going on. If that's what you hear, that's my cat. Okay. Okay. So what about this first problem, right? Because I don't want to justify myself. Well, that could mean a couple different things. The first thing it could mean is just because I can't justify myself, right? That it's arbitrary what I'm saying, that it could be this way or it could be this way. And, I don't have a particular reason to have one way or another, okay? Well, we've already talked about the problem with morality being arbitrary, right? If it's this way, and this way benefits me, then why not that one instead of something else, right? So if there's nothing grounding there, there doesn't seem to be a reason why it has to be one way versus another, right? Another reason it could be, right, is this appeal to authority, right? This is a fallacy when it comes to reasoning. Why is something true? Well, because this guy said it was. Well, that's just shifting the question. That's not an actual argument, right? That's poor reasoning. Even that authority is going to have something to say about it. Otherwise, right, it could just be that other thing. They'll punish you if you don't, right? Now, there's also a potential third response that I wanted to consider here, right? And why be moral? Because I said so. This could also be because of the person who's saying it, right? Because I'm your teacher or your parent or your elder. My word is definitionally good. Well, I think for some people this is pretty unsatisfying, right? It certainly is for me, but I'll say a little bit more about this when we get into divine command theory, because I think there actually might be a little bit more there than first meets the eye. Okay, so this is one possibility, but let's consider the other one, right? If you don't do this, then I will punish you, right? Now this has something going for it, right? If you break the law, right, you don't act according to this rule set, straight to jail, right? Or in the sense of divine command theory, if you don't do what's good, even if you get away with it, get away with breaking the law, God will still know, right? You'll still be breaking God's law, and you'll be sent to, forever jail, right? Hell. So either of these reasons, that might be some reason, but they're not necessarily moral reasons, right? This is kind of out of fear of punishment. That's not necessarily a moral reason, but it is something, right? It is an answer to why be good, okay? But this also raises an interesting question, right? If you could get away with it, right, do we still have a reason to be moral if we had no chance of getting caught? Okay, are we just moral because we fear punishment? And if there wasn't any punishment, or we weren't going to get caught for our moral transgressions, would we still have any reason to act morally? Okay, so this is actually a question, again, that's been around for a long time. A lot of philosophical questions have been, and I've got the ring here to represent another thought experiment from one of Plato's dialogues called the Ring of Gyges. Okay, so this comes out of one of Plato's dialogues, and the thought experiment kind of goes like this, right? If you could put on a ring, right, and in the Ring of Gyges story, you're able to twist the stone on that ring, and you're able to turn invisible. You basically are free of all consequences, right? This might also sound pretty similar to what happens in The Lord of the Rings with the One Ring, right? It always struck me, by the way, I'm like, why is the power, right, of the One Ring invisibility? Of all things, right? Couldn't it be, casting some spell or having tremendous power to convince people? It's interesting that it's invisibility, because what that removes from the wearer is accountability. Okay, so there's an interesting question here. If you were not, held accountable for what you did, do you still have any reason to be moral? In Plato's dialogues, the guy who's arguing using the thought experiment of the Ring of Gyges thought that, well, we probably just do whatever we want, right? We actually don't have any reason to be moral. So this is something interesting to consider, right? Do I have reason to be good independent of punishment, or on the other hand, of what is in my best interest, right? Do I have any reason to be moral beyond it benefits me? All right. So this is just a thought experiment, and there's some various responses to the Ring of Gyges, but I do want you to think about that in terms of what your reasons are to be moral. Okay. So again, it's a simple question, right? Do I have any reason to be good, independent of punishment, or doing what's in my best interest? This is again the fancy, complicated name of this is the grounding problem in ethics. So it's about why at the end of the day should you act morally even when no one's watching, right? Even when it's not in your best interest, right? Or even when it goes against your best interest. So this is a tough question, and all of the various moral theories that we have looked at so far presumably have their own response to the grounding problem. Okay, so some of which you might find more compelling than others. So let's take a couple look at some of these theories, right? So we talked about divine command theory and the associated natural law theory. And these theories, one of their strengths is that they have a very strong response to the grounding problem, right? Why be good? Well, if God exists as this omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent being, as they do in the Abrahamic religions, then there's no getting past them, right? Omniscient means they know everything, and so they, by definition, right, you can't not get caught. It's a compelling idea, this idea that of universal justice, that even if someone escapes the law, that they still ultimately face judgment. Right, this is somewhat compelling, and if you get caught, then or you act goodly, or there's probably a better word for that, act well, act morally, then you stand to either be rewarded in heaven or be condemned to internal suffering, right, in hell, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, or Jahannam in Islam, right? So divine command theory might also provide another reason, right? Rather, if you remember when we said earlier, right, that there's this interesting response, right? Because my word is law. Well, if this comes from your parent, teacher, or elder, right, we might not find that all that convincing. But what if it's God who's saying that, right? A being that is definitionally good, right? If we're being the most charitable we can to divine command theory, then maybe it's not just a mere appeal to authority. Maybe there's some deontological reasons for acting morally, right? Something like respect or loyalty to the divine command. This goes beyond the self-interest or the mere avoiding of punishment involved with the reward or punishment of heaven and hell. And so maybe we can have a respect for what is moral beyond that promise of pain or punishment, right? So this is a strength for divine command theory and natural law theory. But we should also remember, right, from our previous discussion of them, that these theories only retain that benefit if you can get past that pretty significant epistemic hurdle involved with these theories, right? To get these benefits about the grounding problem from divine command theory, you have to believe in a God who will provide eternal judgment, right? Who will provide eternal reward or punishment. So you have to believe in God for this to be very compelling to you. And if you want other people to think that this is a compelling theory, then they also have to believe in God and probably a very similar conception of God to the one that you do. And you can probably see how complicated this gets, given how fraught often the philosophy of religion can be and how much of an epistemic barrier it is, okay? But it is an answer to the grounding problem. Okay, so what about utilitarianism, right? If we remember about utilitarianism, it's grounded in two things for the purposes of the grounding problem, and that is hedonism, right? Pain and pleasure, and reason. Now, this epistemically is pretty good because we can all understand reason and pain and pleasure independent of our religious convictions, right? Right, the idea, hedonism, the idea that pleasure is good and pain is bad, this is something that most people can get on board with, right? Or at least understand, right? You heathens. So utilitarianism would also add the further step that we can reason about what pains and pleasures we should aim for or avoid, right? We can reason that given the fecundity, right, the propensity of a pleasure to beget more pleasure, like exercise, for instance, that's a small pain that is worth it in the outcome because of the pleasure that it produces down the line, right? We can all kind of understand that. But the real question here is, why should I care about being good, right? Pain and pleasure beyond my pain and pleasure, right? I have reason to care about the pain and pleasure of in other people's lives besides my own? Well, there's a couple things that we can say about that. Well, first of all, we don't seem to be purely self-interested creatures, right? Not many people like to think of themselves in that way, but even if we were, uh, right? We all really a staggering amount of various philosophical accounts from across history and across the entire world give accounts of humans as altruistic or other regarding kinds of creatures. We do, in fact, care about the suffering and the happiness of others, right? So that's one thing we could say. Um, it also we can apply our reason to this, right? It doesn't take a whole lot of reasoning to go from I care about my pain and pleasure to then care about the pain and pleasure of others. And if you're with me so far on that, then we can see how utilitarianism has an answer to the grounding problem. Why should we be good? Is because we already care about pain and pleasure, and we have reason to want more pleasure in the world and reason to not want as much pain. Okay, so there's kind of an intuitive response to the grounding problem here. Okay, what about virtue ethics, right? Virtue ethics is really interesting because among the three like big moral theories, utilitarianism, virtue ethics, and deontology, virtue ethics can answer the problem, right? Why bother being good? Well, it is because of your self-interest, right? It's what's called enlightened self-interest. Being virtuous, yes, has its costs, and we'll have to regulate ourselves far more than we would if we just did whatever we want. But the virtue theorist can claim, and I think quite plausibly, that the best possible life that a human can lead is a moral one. So why be good? Because it's the best life you can possibly hope for, right? It actually is beneficial to you, in addition to others, right? But it's beneficial to you to be moral, okay? So what about Kantian ethics, right? Well, Kantian ethics can answer the grounding problem in a couple of different ways. Uh, Kantian ethics is fundamentally about reason and being autonomous, right? Self-governing. And so there's lots of reasons to want to be reasonable, right? We want to be taken seriously, and we get taken seriously when we're seen as reasonable. We want to have integrity, right? We want to be able to look at our own actions and say, I'm a good person. And that doesn't matter who's watching, right? We don't want to be hypocrites, right? This is especially motivating for someone like me, right? I get almost irrationally upset sometimes when I see people acting hypocritically, and so I'm highly motivated, regardless of what is good, to not at least not be a hypocrite, right? And then we could say something like we have a duty as rational beings to uphold our own rationality, right? It's self-destructive in some sense to deny that rationality, and by extension to deny morality. Okay, there's also maybe a eudaimonistic argument to be made here along the same lines as virtue ethics, that maybe the best possible life you could ask for is one in which you act morally, even if it's on Kantian ethics, right? There's some kind of satisfaction that you're able to look back at your life and say that was a life well lived. That can come from Kantian ethics. Okay. Keep in mind that this is probably not how Kant would answer the grounding problem. He might say something like, and I've got a quote from a Kant scholar, Christine Korsgaard here. Kant might say something like, the respect for one's own humanity finds its fullest expression in the respect for that of others, right? So in our own quest to become more fully human, the way we do that is by respecting the humanity of others, right? Kant would also probably say something confusing and at the same time insightful, like when you fully understand what makes something good, you're automatically compelled to bring about that good, okay? So again, Kantian ethics is a pretty deep well, but there are some reasons that we have to be good on Kantian ethics, and quite a few of them, okay? So there are a multitude of reasons to be ethical, many of which apply even when no one is watching, not even God is watching, right? And so the point that I'm trying to make here is that it seems that we do already, in fact, care about many of the fundamental grounding assumptions that many moral theories give us. Right? They can be based on self-interest. They can be based on pain and pleasure for ourselves and others. They can be concerned with living the best possible life or being rational beings, right? These all give us reasons to be good rather than to just do whatever we want. And we haven't even discussed all of the moral theories, right? There are moral theories that can provide additional reasons, like societal well-being or societal cohesion. We could talk about freedom or the mere fact that we care about others, right? So I think I can stand by what I said at the beginning of our study of ethics, right? That you are a fundamentally ethical being, and that ethics never fails to apply. And more than that, it seems that we all have a reason to be good because of the various ways that these moral theories can provide us answers to the grounding problem, right? Probably whatever moral theory you are interested in, subscribe to personally right now, or even your own pre-theoretical ethical intuitions about why ought I be good, are pretty compelling, right? And this is before we get to punishment, right? This is before, right? There's morality and then there's the law, and many times, like, those can go together. Sometimes they don't. But if we get caught, right, being immoral or doing something illegal, right, there's also the fear, the rational fear, I think, of punishment that comes from in either a social or a legal kind of sense, right? So, what am I trying to say here? That all of this is to say that you don't have to use any one of these theories or act in any particular way, right? That's not what I'm trying to say. It also doesn't mean that all of a sudden I've cast a nefarious philosopher's spell on you and that I'm forcing you to be ethical, or that other people can suddenly now tell you how to live your life, right? That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that everything that you do can be viewed from an ethical lens. And through that lens, you can either be right or wrong. You can be confused or clear-headed, virtuous or non-virtuous, rational or irrational, right? And it's good to know, right, as we study ethics, that there's a way that you get to choose which side of that judgment you end up on, regardless of anyone who's watching. All right? So that's the grounding problem. And though I've given you several potential answers to it, right, it's important to consider this for yourself, right? What is that motivation to be good, even when no one else is watching, even when it's hard, and even when maybe it comes at some cost to you? All right? Food for thought. I hope this has been interesting, and I will catch you in the next one.